Hey everyone, it's Jake from Fife Paranormal. Hope you all are doing well. And today I'm going to do a very different video from what I usually do. Now, during my 10 years in the paranormal field, I have never done a private residential investigation myself. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this. I'm not going to get into them in this video, but I have consulted on many cases. Some of the ones I can think of off the top of my head, there was a poltergeist in Virginia that a team contacted me with some assistance. That was a really cool case. I actually wish I could have investigated that one. And then there was a haunted doll in North Carolina. That was kind of a creepy case. Once again, I wish I could have worked on all of these, but the one I'm going to talk about today is a shapeshifter in Virginia. Now, this starts about a year ago. I should say, first off, I'm going to change the names of the people involved. I'm not going to give away locations, stuff like that. But basically, a year ago, I was contacted by a friend of mine's paranormal group from Southern Virginia. And they said, hey, Jake, we were contacted by these people that are having some very strange experiences, and we don't know what's going on. Can you help us? So, of course, I was like, sure, I'd be happy to help. It's part of why I do this. So I was put in contact with the people that were having these experiences, and I got to talking to them for a little while. I got to know them, and then they started telling me their story. And it's interesting because where this case took place is about an hour, close to an hour and a half from where I grew up. So I knew the area pretty well. And actually, my dad, Chris, he investigated around this area. I believe it was in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, somewhere like that is when he investigated. So here's what they told me. They told me that they had been seeing shadow figures in the yard around their home. Now, they live on top of this ridge surrounded by the woods. There's basically one road in, one road out, although there are some old logging roads, some old coal roads that kind of branch off and, stuff like that. West Virginia, especially in the mountains, is full of stuff like that. So they said that it was little stuff like shadow figures moving around. They would see stuff out of the corner of their eyes. Not really anything inside the house. It was more of outside. And then sometimes when they would go hunting, they would see things, they would hear things that didn't seem normal to them. So, this to me is kind of run-of-the-mill West Virginia stuff. There's a corridor of the Appalachian Mountains that people believe, houses more energy, more paranormal activity than other parts. And this just happens to be in that corridor. And then it got interesting. And then they told me that one time they were hunting a few of them, and they came across this creature. And it was standing in the road, and they said it was all black, but it was kind of hunched over, almost, hunkered down like it was hiding in the middle of the road, which kind of a strange place to hide when you think about it. And they were on ATVs. I think they were on four-wheelers. But they said that they stopped, they fired a warning shot, and they said the creature looked up at them, and it had these orange glowing eyes that changed from orange to red, and it spread their wings. Now, it just sounds like they had an encounter with Mothman, which is exactly how they described it. They say it was basically like Mothman, only they said it was about the height of, a normal person, so about 6 foot, something like that. So they said it didn't take off and fly away. They said it spread its wings, made like this shriek sound, and then ran off into the woods. So obviously that's an escalation from shadow figures out of the corner of your eye, hearing voices, to Mothman. Very big jump. So a few weeks went by, and they were still having strange experiences, but now it had kind of escalated to where they were hearing what sounded like weird howls coming from the woods. And I asked them, I said, could it have been coyotes? Could it have been, mountain lions, bobcats, stuff like that? And they said it was possible, but it wasn't like anything they had ever heard before. They said sometimes it sounded more guttural, like it was lower in pitch. Then they said, it kind of reminded us of Bigfoot. And that is one thing I will say about this case. I always get a little suspicious when people right off the bat say, hey, it was just like that scene from, that Ghost Adventures episode, when this happened, or it's just like that scene from that movie. So that is one thing pop culture does kind of suck when you're talking to people trying to establish credibility, because when they immediately liken something to something they saw on television or in a film, then that throws up a few red flags, because if you go instantly for, the big tier activity, that's that's a red flag you should look out for. But these people, I had established credibility with them early on, and some of their experiences matched up stuff I knew about the area and also with some of Chris's experiences. So I proceeded. So while I'm talking with them, I'm also talking with this other team, and I'm telling them, this is what they're telling me, this is what I think so far. And they were like, yeah, the information lines up. So the story that they had told the other people matches up with what they were telling me, which was a really good sign in terms of their credibility. So they told me that there for a while, they started having these creatures. They described them as tall, almost hairy creatures, kind of like Bigfoot, would be coming closer and closer to their house. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird that, all this stuff was kind of staying back, because most of the experiences were about half a mile away on this hunting ground near this old coal mine road. I believe there was like a coal mine that was abandoned, stuff like that. And that's where most of the sightings had taken place, which kind of makes sense. There are a lot of stories of, these strange creatures or paranormal activity kind of hunkering down in these abandoned areas, especially in West Virginia. You go to a lot of old coal camps, coal mine shafts, stuff like that. And there is a lot of paranormal activity and sometimes even Bigfoot sightings around them. As for 100% why, I'm not sure. But I asked them, I said, what's with the escalation? Why are they getting closer? And they said there was one day about 2 weeks. Now this is, they're telling me the story in the moment. This apparently had been going on for about half a year. And they said that one of their cousins was in to visit. And this is in, I believe they said it was like February or something like that. And they had been out hunting and they saw one of those creatures, but it was from a distance. So they thought it was a bear and they actually shot at it. And apparently they hit it because they said there was just this big loud scream. They said it was one of the worst sounds they had ever heard. And so, ever since then, whatever was in the woods started becoming more and more aggressive. And I also noticed that they started talking about more changes in personality from people within the home. So there was a change in activity outside the home as well as inside the home. And remember earlier I said there wasn't activity inside the home. Well, now there was. Some people would be going through very strange mood swings, which the lighting, real quick. Sorry about the lighting, overexposing it. Cloud cover Virginia. Anyway, they experienced mood changes in some of the people, but it wasn't just, I guess, normal mood changes. It was, one extreme to the other. And they said that, it was unlike the people that this was happening to, stuff like that. So, they started telling me about more and more experiences. Some of them were pretty creepy. At one point, they were sitting inside late at night and they had heard something banging on the door, went out to go check, nothing there. But they said, what was it? They said there was a huge tree limb that had just fallen out of complete nowhere. And it looked like that it had been, what was it? They said there were weird looking claw marks on it that didn't look normal, which, that could have been bad. That could have been 100 things. But I asked them, I said, is there anything that could have set this off? What could have started all of this? And, the person, they were like, well, I don't know, I usually work all the time. Let me have my sister contact you. She's the one who's mainly here. So she contacted me about 30 minutes later, and she said, well, this is what we think happened. Apparently, they had been out in the woods. There was like it's like an abandoned little area, abandoned barn, something like that. Basically, it's an abandoned structure in the woods. Not terribly far from their house, but they had been using an Ouija board. Which I don't believe Ouija boards are inherently evil. I think how you use one determines, what ends up happening. So anyway, they were using a Ouija board, and apparently they had read something online saying that you have better success with a Ouija board if you smear it with your own blood. This is something I have never heard before. It sounds very ritualistic, but that's what they did. So I don't know how they did, but they got some of their blood. I think it was like 3 or 4 of them that were doing the Ouija board session. They just smeared it, on the board and then some on the planchette and then used it like that. And they said apparently they had some really negative stuff come through. A lot of really scary stuff happened. And they said when they left, there was this really foul odor in the air, almost like rotten flesh, something like that, which, that some people believe that's a telltale sign of a demonic entity. And basically, they were thinking that they had summoned something into the area that was now terrorizing them, which is very possible. It does kind of sound like that's what happened, but it is possible that a few weird things happen, and because of, what they had read online, their imaginations ran wild, or it could be that they tapped into something that was already there. See, I'm not going to give the name of the location of where this took place, but this area is well known in the area among paranormal investigators for having strange things happen. One day I'll have Chris do a video where he talks about his experiences up here, but basically it's kind of a messed up area, some very dark energy, so I believe they tapped into that energy. Now, some strange stuff kept on happening, and I said, I gave them a few things that they could do, First thing I said, try to ignore it, see what happens. I said, try to stick to areas away from, where you see these creatures, because most times they've seen the creatures, far from the house. I said, sounds like, they're protecting an area. They don't want, to come to you. They want you to stay out of their area. So I told them to do that. I said, try not to pay any attention to the paranormal activity, light some white candles, do the white light exercise, whatever makes you feel stronger and safer. And so they did. They weren't religious, so I didn't tell them, to do the Lord's Prayer or anything like that, because each person has their own belief system, obviously, and they have their own ideas of what keeps them safe. So they got back to me about a week and a half later saying, hey, this is fine, all this stuff. And throughout the time, I was talking with the paranormal group that had contacted me, and I was saying, hey, I know you're still in contact with them. This is what I told them to do. If you have any suggestions, let them know. This is what I think is going on. And slowly, stuff started waning off a little bit. They were still having strange things happen. And in the woods, they were still having the feelings of being watched. But over the course of about a month, it went from a lot of crazy stuff happening to really nothing happening. And that was kind of the end of my involvement in the case. The last I heard about it was, I think it was in April, was the last I heard anything about. And they said that paranormal activity is basically, nothing now. They occasionally hear footsteps, and they still get the feelings of being watched in the woods, but that's kind of normal. But yeah, that was probably the craziest case I've ever worked on, simply because there are so many things it could have been. I've theorized for a while that whatever's up on that ridge, it's possible there's a Bigfoot, but I think there's an elemental entity, or maybe a shapeshifter. I'm leaning more towards elemental, simply because it does seem to be protecting an area, and it can shapeshift and do all this stuff. So that's probably the craziest case I've ever consulted on. Probably second would be the poltergeist case. Third would be the haunted doll. But I hope you all have enjoyed this video. If you'd like to hear about any other cases I've consulted on, leave the comments below. I'd love to hear from you, and I hope you all have a great day.